Somewhere within the archives of antebellum Louisiana, hidden beneath plantation ledgers and auction records, lies a name that should never have been forgotten. It belonged to a man who stepped into improvised fighting rings 37 times and survived every match, while his opponents did not. The authorities never intervened, newspapers never covered the events, and the men who earned money from his victories ensured no official documentation would ever reveal the full truth. What we are about to share comes from private journals, estate papers, and testimonies that were intentionally concealed for more than a century. Before we continue with the account of the man known as the Bayou Giant, I need you to do one thing. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and comment below which state or city you are watching from. You will want to follow every part of what comes next. The story begins not with violence, but with a transaction that set the rest in motion. In 1847, St. Landry Parish was a place where fortunes rose and fell with the sugar harvest. The land was flat, humid, and interrupted only by cypress swamps and the occasional plantation house standing like a white symbol of wealth built on forced labor. The town of Opelousas served as the parish seat, consisting of wooden shops, a courthouse, and a slave market that operated on the third Saturday of every month. Society was divided into strict levels. At the top were the plantation owners, men such as Charles Bogard Marchand, whose family had turned 3,000 acres of Louisiana farmland into one of the state's most profitable sugar estates. Below them were overseers, merchants, and skilled workers. At the base were the enslaved men and women whose identities appeared only in property records. Marchand, a 38-year-old third-generation planter, was known for sharp business skills and a particular pastime that distinguished him from others of his class. While many wealthy men raised horses or collected fine wines, Marchand developed a strong interest in what he called physical contests. He attended boxing events in New Orleans, traveled to Mobile for bare-knuckle fights, and even went to Charleston to watch well-known fighters. But observing was no longer enough. He wanted to own a fighter himself. In September of that year, a slave ship arrived in New Orleans carrying people from the Carolinas. Among those auctioned was a man listed as Samuel, about 24 years old, described as exceptionally strong and in excellent physical condition. The record noted a height of 6 feet 4 inches, remarkable for the era, and a weight near 230 pounds, most of it muscle developed through plantation labor. Marchand paid $800 for him, nearly double the usual price. Other bidders considered it a poor decision. Samuel had a history of resistance, both subtle and direct. He had been sold 3 times in 4 years, as each owner preferred to remove him despite his physical value. His bill of sale included a handwritten note. Strong-willed, requires firm control. What they did not understand was that Marchand was not purchasing a field worker. He was acquiring a weapon. The Marchand plantation sat 7 miles west of Opelousas, reachable by a road that turned to mud when it rained. The main house was a 2-story structure with wide porches and shuttered windows meant to catch whatever breeze could ease the Louisiana heat. Behind it were the sugar fields, the processing mill, the overseer's house, and the cramped quarters where enslaved workers lived. Samuel was first placed in the stables, a position usually given to those considered calm and compliant. The other enslaved workers were confused. Stable hands were typically chosen for obedience, and Samuel was neither obedient nor accepting of his situation. But Marchand had specific intentions. For 3 weeks he simply observed. He watched Samuel work, noting his movements and the controlled strength in every action. He studied the man's eyes, searching for something he could not immediately identify, a quality that separated a person who would fight from someone who would only endure. He discovered it one afternoon in October, when an overseer named Dutch Keller, known for unnecessary cruelty, tried to exert his authority. Angered by something Samuel did or did not do, Keller raised his whip. Samuel caught his wrist mid-swing. The plantation seemed to freeze. Ordinarily, what followed would have been predictable. Samuel would have been dragged to the whipping post, punished severely, and used as an example. Instead, Marchand himself stepped in. He entered the stable, assessed the scene at a glance, and ordered Keller to leave. Keller protested, arguing that discipline must be upheld. but Marchand repeated the command with a tone that ended the discussion. When Keller left, Marchand faced Samuel. They stood quietly for a moment before Marchand finally spoke, choosing his words with care. "I know what you are," he said. "I know you will not be broken, and I am not going to attempt that. But I am going to give you an offer." The offer was simple yet troubling: fight, or see those you care about suffer the consequences. Marchand understood that direct force would never control Samuel. The man was too strong, too determined, too willing to resist even at great personal risk. But during those first 3 weeks, Marchand had noticed something that gave him leverage. Samuel, despite trying to keep to himself, had formed quiet bonds. There was Diner, who worked in the kitchen. Silas, an older man who had shown him the safer paths around the plantation. And a young boy, no older than 10, who spent time near the stables whenever he could. Marchand made his terms clear. If Samuel refused to fight or if he lost, these people would pay the price. They would be sold to the harshest plantations he could find, separated without warning. They could be handed over to overseers like Keller, who would have full permission to treat them however they wished. Their suffering was described plainly, enough to show Marchand was serious. But if Samuel fought and continued to win, they would be protected. They would receive better rations, be spared from the worst labor, and Samuel himself would be given certain privileges: improved food, a separate cabin, an exemption from field work that usually destroyed men long before their time. The first fight was set for November 14, 1847, in a clearing 3 miles from the main house. Word had already circulated among the parish's wealthy planters that Marchand had acquired someone unusual. 15 men arrived that evening, each bringing his own enslaved fighter and each assuming his man would prevail. The fighting area was simple: just a cleared space surrounded by torches stuck into the ground at uneven distances. The rules were explained with direct clarity. The fighters would continue until one could not go on. No weapons, no leniency. The owner of the victorious fighter would take the pooled winnings from all participants. Samuel's opponent that night was Jupiter, owned by Etienne Roussel. Jupiter had fought 3 previous matches, winning each one. He was older than Samuel, probably around 30, with scars that reflected years of violence. Roussel had brought him specifically to challenge Marchand and to show that experience mattered more than size. The fight started just after sunset, and what took place over the following 17 minutes established the pattern that would repeat in every match ahead. Samuel moved with a mix of power and controlled precision. Every strike seemed purposeful. He took blows that would have stopped most men, yet continued forward with little hesitation. Jupiter fought well, landing hits that cut above Samuel's eyes and bruised his ribs, injuries that should have slowed him. They did not. The match ended when Jupiter collapsed, his body finally giving out. He was carried away unconscious but still breathing. Later, the plantation doctor noted severe trauma to Jupiter's head and torso, describing his condition as critical. Jupiter died 4 days later, though his official cause of death was recorded as fever. Samuel remained in the ring, blood on his face, waiting to be dismissed. Marchand collected almost $200 in winnings and then spoke to Samuel privately. The exchange was short. Marchand asked, "Can you do that again?" Samuel responded, "As many times as needed." Over the next 18 months, Samuel fought 11 additional matches. Each one followed the same pattern. Planters met in secret places, their enslaved fighters put against one another for profit. Winners were celebrated. Losers were carried away. Of those 11 opponents, 8 died, some in the ring and others later from their injuries. The fights became notable events. Planters traveled from Baton Rouge, Lafayette, and other areas to see them. The stakes increased. Marchand's standing grew, and he used it to expand his operations. He enlarged his plantation, purchased additional enslaved workers, and invested in improved sugar processing equipment. Money from Samuel's fights allowed him to grow far faster than legitimate business alone would have permitted. But the real cost was being paid elsewhere, in ways that would only be understood much later. Samuel held up his end of the agreement. He fought when ordered. He won as expected. In exchange, Marshan kept his promises. Diner, Silas, and the boy, Marcus, were protected and treated better than the others on the plantation. They became a small circle of people Samuel allowed himself to care about, the closest thing to a community he would ever have there. Still, things were shifting. Other enslaved workers began to watch Samuel with respect mixed with fear. They noticed him leave for unexplained trips and return with new injuries, wounds severe enough to stop most men. Yet he continued working. Rumors grew. Some thought he was favored. Others believed he was cursed. A few whispered that he had made some sort of pact, though no one agreed on with whom or what. The white overseers and laborers formed their own views. They kept their distance, spoke to him only when required, avoided meeting his eyes. Even Keller, who had once tried to dominate him, now acted with caution. It created an unusual situation in a system based entirely on the unquestioned control of enslaved people. This shift produced a quiet tension that spread across the plantation. Marshan, however, ignored or dismissed these concerns. He continued making money, gaining influence, and building his operations around Samuel's abilities. He recorded every detail in a leather-bound journal: opponents, locations, wagers, and results. He tracked Samuel's food, training, and physical condition before and after matches. To Marshan, this was simple management of a profitable asset. What he didn't acknowledge or chose not to was the look in Samuel's eyes, an expression that suggested calculation and patience. By the spring of 1849, Samuel had competed 19 times. 19 victories, 14 deaths. The remaining 5 fighters survived but were left permanently weakened, considered damaged property by their owners. The 20th match was planned for April 23 on a plantation near Krotz Springs. The opponent was Cato, owned by James Wesley Thorne. Thorne was relatively new to the region, having moved from Georgia the previous year, and he had brought Cato for this very purpose. Cato had reportedly killed 6 men in Georgia, each match increasing his reputation. The prize for this fight was $500. A significant amount reflecting the anticipation surrounding it. Thorne had been telling anyone who would listen that Cato would end Samuel's winning streak. Other planters took sides, placed bets, and arrived at the clearing with an enthusiasm that bordered on expectation. The ring was set within a grove of live oaks covered in Spanish moss. Torches cast unsteady light across the gathering. Samuel and Cato stood facing each other while the rules were repeated. Rules everyone knew meant little, since survival was the only true measure. The fight lasted 23 minutes. Cato proved to be exactly as Thorne had described: strong, seasoned, and completely ruthless. His technique suggested formal training, the type learned from people who viewed boxing as a disciplined skill rather than a simple brawl. He targeted key areas, worked to weaken Samuel's arms, and aimed at vulnerable points that would wear him down with time. For the first time since the bout with Jupiter, Samuel appeared to be in real danger. Cato delivered combinations that shook him, opening a deep cut above his left eye that bled heavily enough to affect his sight. The crowd sensed a shift, believing they might finally witness Samuel lose. But something changed in the 16th minute. Cato landed a heavy strike to Samuel's ribs, a hit followed by an audible crack. Samuel dropped to one knee. Thorne began celebrating. Marshan turned pale. The spectators leaned in, expecting the match to end. Samuel stood up again. Accounts written later by men who were present agree on what followed. Samuel didn't simply resume fighting, he changed completely. His controlled method disappeared, replaced by something more raw and overwhelming. He absorbed Cato's hits without reaction and responded with force that exceeded normal limits. The fight ended when Samuel struck Cato's temple with a blow loud enough for everyone to hear. Cato died instantly. The clearing fell silent. Even the usual sounds of the Louisiana night seemed to stop. Samuel stood over Cato's body, breathing hard, his face and chest covered in blood. When he looked toward the crowd, several men instinctively stepped back. Marshan collected his earnings, but for the first time he appeared unsure. What he witnessed unsettled him in ways he couldn't define. During the ride back, he kept glancing at Samuel, as though seeing him clearly for the first time. "You could have finished it earlier," Marshan finally said. "You were toying with him." Samuel waited before responding. When he did, his voice was calm and clear. "I was teaching him, and everyone watching, something." "What?" "That I cannot be beaten." The words made Marzhan uneasy. He had wanted Samuel to be unbeatable. That was the entire purpose of these fights. Yet there was a difference between winning and what he had seen that night. A difference between controlled force and something that felt closer to revelation. They returned in silence. Over the next days, Marzhan reread his journal, examining every note to identify where things had shifted, when Prophet had turned into something else, when Samuel had gone from dangerous to something more troubling. He found no answer. And by the time he understood the importance of asking, it was too late. Cato's death changed everything. News moved quickly through the plantation networks, carried by enslaved workers communicating through channels their owners never fully understood. Stories grew with each retelling. Samuel wasn't just strong, he was unstoppable. He wasn't only skilled, he was believed to be protected. The details changed, but the message remained. Here was a man who had found a way to remain unbroken inside a system built to break him. For some, this was encouragement. For others, a warning. Marzhan began receiving invitations from planters across Louisiana and even into Mississippi, all wanting to challenge Samuel with their own fighters or witness the spectacle that had become widely known. Marzhan accepted selectively, always raising the stakes. Between April 1849 and September 1850, Samuel fought in 12 more matches. 12 victories, 10 more deaths. The two survivors were so severely injured that their owners sold them at a loss, no longer useful except in the harshest labor. Yet something deeper was happening. Samuel was learning. Each event revealed information about the men who owned him and those like them. Their business dealings, rivalries, and weaknesses. During the gatherings, as he stood silently in the ring, he overheard conversations wealthy men never imagined an enslaved worker would understand. They had made a critical mistake. They had given him access to power while assuming he remained powerless. By fall 1850, Marshan's plantation had become one of the most profitable in the region. Using money from Samuel's fights, he expanded operations, bought new land, and positioned himself among the elite planters. He added a new wing to his home, imported French furniture, and sent his eldest son to study in New Orleans. Success brought confidence, and confidence led to carelessness. The 32nd fight was arranged for October 19, 1850, on a plantation near New Iberia. Samuel's opponent was Caesar, owned by Vincent Laframmes, a man known for cruelty even among those who built fortunes on exploitation. Laframmes had already gone through 7 fighters before Caesar, discarding each when they stopped being useful. Caesar had survived 4 fights, killing 3 opponents and crippling the 4th. The purse was $750, the largest yet. Over 50 spectators attended, the biggest crowd Samuel had faced. The fight began at dusk and lasted 31 minutes. Caesar fought with the desperation of someone who knew defeat meant death or something close to it. He was skilled, strong, and fully committed to surviving. But Samuel had fought 31 times, 31 victories, 24 deaths. He understood something Caesar did not. That the true fight wasn't between them but between the men who owned them and profited from their bodies. Samuel eventually maneuvered Caesar into a position where the final blow was unavoidable. Caesar fell and did not rise. The doctor pronounced him dead immediately. As Samuel waited in the ring, something unexpected occurred. An enslaved worker named Benjamin, owned by Collier, stepped forward and addressed Samuel directly. An act forbidden by every rule. Overseers moved to stop him but hesitated. "How many?" Benjamin asked. 32, Samuel replied. "And you still here?" The exchange lasted seconds but carried enormous meaning for every enslaved person watching. Samuel wasn't just surviving, he was resisting, not by the fights themselves, but by remaining whole in a world built to destroy him. When Samuel walked out, several other enslaved workers met his eyes, something normally punished. Their message was clear. They recognized him. They understood. Marzhan sensed the shift and left quickly. On the way back, he finally voiced a concern that had been building since the fight with Cato. "This has to stop," he said. Samuel, hands now kept bound during travel, a new precaution, said nothing. I mean it, Marshan continued, though it was unclear whether he was speaking to Samuel or to himself. This has gone too far. But in reality, it had not gone far enough. Not yet. The issue with creating a legend is that once it forms, it begins moving on its own. Marshan wanted to stop organizing the fights, step away from the activity that had made him wealthy but increasingly uneasy. Yet the other planters would not permit it. They had invested in this spectacle and tied their reputations to it. They pressured Marshan, making it clear that withdrawing would harm his business connections, his social standing, and his ability to function in a system built on shared obligation. So the fights continued. Fight 33 against a man called Prometheus lasted 12 minutes. He died. Fight 34 against a man named Atlas went 19 minutes. Also dead. Fight 35 with a man named Hannibal continued for 27 minutes. Another death. Each event expanded Samuel's reputation. With every victory, the belief among enslaved workers grew that he was someone who could not be defeated, someone who had surpassed the limits that kept them trapped in the system. The stories became exaggerated. Samuel could see the future. Samuel had some divine favor. Samuel would eventually lead them all to freedom. Samuel himself never commented on these ideas. He fought when ordered, won consistently, and continued observing, listening, and learning about the men who owned him and the structure that sustained them. Marshan's journal during this period shows his increasing concern. On November 23, 1850, he wrote, "The fights are no longer under my control. Samuel wins, as usual, but there is something about these victories that unsettles me. It feels as though he is sending a message, though I cannot identify to whom." On December 8th, he received news that 3 enslaved workers on the Rousel plantation had resisted their overseer. They invoked Samuel's name and said they were inspired by his example. The matter was handled using the typical punitive measures, but it revealed a development Marshan had not anticipated. On January 14, 1851, he wrote that the 36th fight would be the final one. He planned to inform the other planters and end Samuel's availability. The profits had been substantial, but the overall cost was growing too high. However, Marshan never made that announcement, because on January 19, 1851, an incident occurred that changed everything. A young overseer named Thomas Gaines, recently employed and eager to establish authority, believed Samuel had been granted too many freedoms. He confronted Samuel near the stables and demanded he perform a simple task immediately. Samuel, following Marshan's instructions to rest before the upcoming fight, explained the situation calmly. Gaines struck him with a riding crop. What followed was observed by 7 witnesses. 4 enslaved workers, 2 overseers, and a merchant who had come to conduct business with Marshan. Their statements match in all essential details. Samuel did not respond with violence. Instead, he turned and walked toward the main house, ignoring Gaines's shouted orders. Gaines, angered by the perceived defiance, raised the riding crop again and followed him. Marshan stepped outside just as Gaines reached Samuel. Understanding the situation instantly, Marshan ordered Gaines to stop. Gaines, too agitated to think clearly, spoke to Marshan in a way several witnesses later declined to repeat, but it reportedly involved questioning Marshan's authority and suggesting that Samuel's treatment had created a dangerous example. Marshan dismissed Gaines immediately. Gaines left, but not before making his own statement. "You've created something you can't control, and when it turns on you, don't say you weren't warned." That evening, Marshan sat in his study with his journal open but could not write. For more than 3 years, he had recorded every fight, victory, and transaction. The journal had begun as a business record but had evolved into a personal account of his growing discomfort. Eventually, he wrote a single line. Gaines was right, but despite that, nothing changed. The 36th fight was already scheduled for February 2, 1851. The opponent was named Goliath, an unusually fitting name that reflected his owner's dramatic tendencies. He belonged to a planter named Austin Budrow, who had spent 5 years breeding and training enslaved fighters. Goliath was considered his most successful result. The event took place on Budrow's plantation near Bro Bridge, with over 70 spectators, the largest crowd yet. The prize exceeded $1,000, and additional side wagers created a total amount greater than what many Louisiana families earned in 5 years. The fight started at 8 p.m. on a cold February night. Goliath was enormous, about 6 feet 6 inches tall and likely 250 pounds. He had killed 4 previous opponents, and Budrow made sure everyone knew. For the first time in 35 matches, Samuel appeared to face genuine difficulty. Goliath's size created a reach advantage that Samuel struggled to counter. His strength was considerable, and the sound of his punches could be heard clearly across the gathering. Samuel absorbed blows that should have ended the fight, yet he continued standing, continued fighting, and remained seemingly beyond ordinary physical limits. The match lasted 42 minutes, the longest so far. Both men were injured and fatigued, relying on reserves of strength that seemed beyond normal capability. The crowd became quiet, observing something that resembled a test of endurance rather than a competition. Samuel ended the fight with a sequence of strikes that forced Goliath to his knees. As Goliath attempted to get up, Samuel delivered a final blow to the side of the head, producing the familiar sound recognized by those who had attended previous fights, the sound of something essential breaking. Goliath collapsed and did not move. The plantation doctor examined him and confirmed what everyone already understood. He was dead. Samuel stood in the center of the ring, slightly unsteady but still upright. Blood covered his face and chest, one eye swollen shut, his breathing uneven. When he glanced at the crowd, something in his expression caused several men to step back. Marshan gathered the $1,400 in winnings and approached him carefully. "We're finished," he said quietly. "No more fights. I mean it." Samuel spoke softly, nearly drowned out by the noise of the dispersing crowd. "One more. 37. I need one more." Marshan wanted to refuse and end the cycle before anything further occurred. But after looking at Samuel, he realized this was not a request. It was a statement. Whether Marshan agreed or not, there would be one more fight. "Why 37? Marshan asked. Samuel's response was brief and unsettling. "Because that's how many it takes." Marshan never wrote what he thought this implied. Perhaps he did not want to consider it. The final fight was held on March 17, 1851, at a location kept secret until the last moment, a clearing near the edge of the Atchafalaya Basin, far from plantation houses and reachable only by narrow swamp paths. The secrecy was necessary, as law enforcement had begun asking questions. There had been too many deaths, too many unexplained events, and too many stories among enslaved communities about a man who could not be defeated. The journey to the clearing began before sunrise. Marshan arranged for Samuel to be transported separately from the other spectators, using a winding route through isolated waterways known only to skilled boatmen. The morning fog was dense, and the swamp sounds, alligators entering the water, herons calling from the shallows, created an atmosphere of deep isolation. They arrived to find the clearing already prepared. Someone had put significant effort into making the area suitable for what was about to take place. Torches were set into the ground at regular intervals, though they remained unlit in the daylight. A rough ring had been outlined with rope staked into the soft soil. Wooden planks covered the wettest sections to give solid footing for spectators who would pay high prices for better viewing spots. The opponent for this 37th fight was a man named Ajax, owned by a planter named Leopold Crane. Crane had brought Ajax from somewhere in the Caribbean specifically for this event, spending nearly 18 months searching for someone he believed could finally defeat Samuel. Ajax had reportedly killed 9 men in fights on 3 different islands. Crane had paid an unusually high price for him, $2,000, along with promises of future business deals if Ajax proved successful. Ajax arrived at the clearing in chains, a measure his owner insisted upon. He was extremely large, around 6 feet 7 inches, with a body that showed both natural power and years of forced training. His face carried scars from past fights, and his expression held a certain look. Not anger exactly, but a firm acceptance of what he had to do. Like all enslaved fighters, he understood that survival depended on winning, and winning required doing whatever was necessary. But there was something else about this final fight, something not revealed until later. Crane had made a separate arrangement with several other planters, including Harrison Talbot, who had lost considerable money betting against Samuel over the past year. They had agreed on a simple plan. If Ajax failed to beat Samuel, they would ensure Samuel did not leave the clearing alive. Armed overseers were positioned around the area, each given clear instructions. Rifles were distributed, and exit paths were blocked. This isolated clearing in the swamp was intended to become Samuel's final resting place. Marshan learned about the conspiracy roughly an hour before the fight was supposed to start. A woman named Patience, enslaved on Talbot's cousin's plantation, had overheard part of a conversation late the night before. She understood enough to realize Samuel faced more than a normal fight. Patience told her sister, who worked in a nearby plantation's kitchen, that sister risked serious punishment to find Dina in the early morning. Dina managed to get a message to Marshan by slipping him a note during the rush of preparations when many people were getting ready to travel to the clearing. The note was short, written neatly on a small piece of brown paper. They planned to kill him no matter what happens in the ring. Marshan now faced a decision that would shape everything that followed. He could warn Samuel, possibly saving his life, but doing so would destroy his own reputation and business ties with men who controlled credit, transportation, and political influence across the region. Or he could say nothing, allow the plan to unfold, and accept that he had helped create the problem from the beginning. He had turned Samuel into what he had become: a legend, a symbol, and now an issue certain people wanted removed. Marshan chose neither path. Instead, he did something unexpected. He went directly to Samuel and told him everything. They stood at the edge of the clearing, away from the growing number of spectators arriving throughout the morning. The swamp surrounded them, full of sound and movement. Marshan showed Samuel the note, explained what he had learned, named those involved, described where the armed men were placed, and detailed what they intended to do. Samuel listened silently, showing no reaction. When Marshan finished, a long pause followed, broken only by the natural sounds around them. Finally, Samuel asked a single question. "The people you promised to protect, Dina, Silas, Marcus, will they be safe?" "I'll ensure it," Marshan replied, and he meant it with a seriousness that surprised even him. Over more than 3 years, these individuals had become more than property or means to control Samuel. They had become a responsibility he accepted, perhaps the only moral commitment he still upheld in an enterprise built on exploitation and violence. Samuel nodded slowly, thinking through the situation carefully, as he always did. Then he said, "It doesn't matter what they've planned. You can't fight if you know they're going to kill you afterward," Marshan insisted, his voice beginning to show strain. "We can leave now. We can go to New Orleans, disappear before they notice. I have money saved. We can buy passage on a ship. Get you somewhere they can't reach." No, Samuel's answer was firm, final, and left no room for argument. 37 fights. That's what it takes. "What does that mean, Samuel?" "Why 37? Marshan asked, but Samuel was already walking toward the ring, moving with the calm assurance of someone who had accepted whatever lay ahead. Marshan wanted to stop him, force him to reconsider, make him understand that entering the ring was choosing death. But something in Samuel's presence made it clear this was not denial or surrender. It was a deliberate choice. By noon, more than 80 spectators had arrived, the largest crowd Samuel had ever faced. They represented wealth and authority from Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. Many had traveled long distances to witness the fight, curious about the reputation Samuel had gained. The purse was more than $1,500, with side bets pushing the total to over $5,000. Enough to purchase a small plantation or start a business in New Orleans. The atmosphere felt different from past events. There was excitement, but also a deeper tension that went beyond normal expectations. Too many people knew or suspected something was wrong, or sensed an additional layer of danger surrounding the fight. Conversations stayed quiet. Men checked their weapons, claiming it was for protection during the trip through the swamp, though the frequency of these checks suggested another reason. The enslaved workers forced to attend, brought to handle tasks, serve refreshments, and assist with setup. Gathered in the background, the enslaved workers gathered at the edge of the clearing formed small groups of their own. More than 40 individuals from various plantations were present. They spoke little, but their eyes tracked everything around them, observing the armed overseers, noting their positions, and recognizing that something important was unfolding. At exactly 2 p.m., the fight was formally announced. The rules were repeated, though most people understood they were largely symbolic. Samuel and Ajax would fight until one of them could no longer continue. No weapons, no outside interference, and the winning owner would receive the purse. The defeated fighter would be removed from the ring in whatever condition the combat left him. Ajax was released from his chains and guided toward the ring. His movements showed controlled strength as he stretched and tested his flexibility. Crane, his owner, spoke to him quietly, likely giving final instructions, but Ajax's expression remained unchanged. He had fought 9 times before and understood his role. Samuel entered from the opposite side, wearing only rough cotton trousers. His chest was bare, and his feet were wrapped with thin cloth for minimal protection. Standing 6 feet 4 inches and weighing about 230 pounds, he was slightly smaller than Ajax, yet his body displayed the marks of 3 years of constant fighting scars from heavy strikes and muscles formed through repeated combat rather than regular labor. The men faced each other across roughly 15 feet of cleared ground. The audience fell silent, and even the swamp seemed to settle, as though the environment recognized the importance of the moment. Whitfield, a planter chosen as the timekeeper, raised his hand. "When I lower my arm, the fight begins," he said. "Continue until one man cannot stand or defend himself." He lowered his arm. For the first half-minute, neither fighter advanced. They circled cautiously, studying each other's movements and searching for weaknesses. Ajax held the advantage in reach and arm length, but Samuel had fought 36 opponents before and understood how to adapt. Ajax struck first with a testing jab that Samuel blocked with ease. He followed with a short series of blows, evaluating Samuel's reactions. Samuel took 2 strikes and returned 1 solid punch to Ajax's ribs, the impact clearly audible. The fight officially began. For about 15 minutes, the combat resembled Samuel's earlier matches. Ajax fought with skill and strength, using techniques that showed clear training. He targeted areas he knew were already vulnerable. Samuel's left eye from the Goliath fight, ribs that had never completely healed, and joints weakened from years of forced combat. His plan was to apply steady damage, exhaust Samuel, and wait for the moment when accumulated injury would allow a finishing strike. But Samuel had developed his own method over 36 fights. He endured blows that would have stopped many others and used his apparent vulnerability to create chances for counterattacks. When Ajax committed to what should have been a powerful hit to Samuel's temple, Samuel closed the distance, avoiding the worst of it and delivering 3 quick punches to Ajax's midsection. When Ajax attempted to step back and restore distance, Samuel advanced, forcing close-range combat where his lower center of gravity gave him leverage. As the fight continued, the crowd's reaction changed. Enthusiasm shifted into something quieter and more serious. The spectators sensed they were watching a confrontation beyond ordinary violence. Ajax delivered strikes strong enough to end most fights. Samuel endured them and kept moving. Samuel responded with combinations that should have brought Ajax down, yet Ajax stayed upright, still fighting. 20 minutes into the match, both fighters were bleeding from several cuts. Samuel's left eye had nearly swollen shut, and Ajax's labored breathing indicated possible rib damage. Their movements slowed as they conserved energy, though their focus remained intense. Each hit carried the awareness that the first major mistake could mean death. At around the 25-minute mark, the momentum shifted. Samuel stopped trying to block or evade. Instead, he moved forward, accepting blows that should have knocked him down while launching his own attacks. His strategy was straightforward. Exchange strikes equally and rely on his endurance and determination to outlast Ajax. Ajax attempted to create distance, to use his reach again, but Samuel continued to move toward him. Each punch Samuel delivered seemed to reflect accumulated frustration. Years of enforced fighting, of being treated as property, and of enduring a life designed to break him. The crowd watched in near total silence, aware that this moment represented something far beyond a spectator event. Some looked away, while others stared intently, unable to ignore what was happening. The enslaved workers did not move, fully understanding that this confrontation would be remembered long after that day. The fight lasted a total of 33 minutes. It ended when Samuel delivered a final strike to Ajax's temple, a blow that everyone knew was fatal the moment it landed. Before Ajax even fell, his body stiffened and then collapsed into the mud. The plantation doctor quickly entered the ring, examined him, and announced what was already clear. Ajax was dead. Samuel remained standing in the center of the ring. He swayed slightly but stayed upright. Blood covered most of his upper body, mixed with sweat and mud until he appeared almost unrecognizable. His breathing was rough, likely due to rib injuries. His left eye was completely closed, and his right hand hung awkwardly, possibly broken. Yet he remained on his feet. After 37 fights and 37 deaths, he was still standing. He looked directly at the crowd, and something in his expression caused several men to step back. It wasn't triumph or pride. It was a clear, heavy awareness of what he had been forced to become and what that meant for everyone watching. Talbot, positioned near the edge of the clearing with armed overseers nearby, gave a subtle nod. The meaning was unmistakable. The overseers lifted their rifles and aimed at Samuel from multiple directions. Since Ajax had failed in the ring, the plan was to kill Samuel regardless, shoot him and leave his body in the swamp. They did not speak, threaten, or take any action that could be labeled as open defiance. They simply stepped between Samuel and the armed overseers, forming a human shield that would require the men with rifles to shoot through them in order to reach him. For several long seconds, no one moved at all. The tension was so severe that even breathing felt risky. The armed overseers kept their guns raised but waited for Tolbert's command, their fingers unsure on the triggers. Tolbert glanced at the other planters involved in the plan, attempting to judge whether they were willing to support him if this turned into real violence. The planters exchanged uneasy looks, each suddenly aware that the situation had gone far beyond what they intended. Their calculations were quick but complicated. Shooting at Samuel now meant firing into enslaved workers owned by other planters, damaging property that was not theirs. That meant potential legal trouble, financial loss, and violation of unwritten rules that maintained order among plantation owners. It also meant turning what was supposed to be a quiet elimination into an event that might require explanations, official inquiries, and unwanted attention. More importantly, it forced them to confront a truth they had ignored for years. Samuel had never been isolated. Every fight, every victory, every opponent he defeated had been witnessed by enslaved people who shared the stories across the region. Samuel had grown into a symbol, a representation of resistance, proof that strength and spirit could survive conditions designed to crush them. Killing him in front of more than 40 witnesses, who would spread the story further, risked creating a martyr whose legend would hold more power than he ever could alive. Marzhan broke the silence. He stepped in front of the armed men, positioning himself between them and the workers standing as a barrier. He spoke to the crowd with a voice strong enough to carry across the clearing. The fight is finished. Samuel has won according to the rules we all agreed to. Anyone who disagrees may address the matter with me, directly through proper legal channels if necessary. It was an unusual moment. A planter openly challenging others of his rank, standing between his own property and their intentions, and appealing to legal structures they usually ignored whenever convenient. Several men protested immediately. Tolbert's face turned red with anger. Crane, who had just lost both Ajax and his investment, shouted that the situation was unacceptable. But Marzhan, as Samuel's owner for the past 3 years, held a certain accepted authority. There were understood, though unwritten, codes among them. Destroying another man's property without just cause was considered theft, and theft carried consequences, even among men who built their wealth by owning human beings. Since Samuel had won under the terms agreed upon, Marzhan had at least minimal legal standing. And more importantly, he had allies. Men who had earned substantial sums by betting on Samuel, men who owed Marshan favors, men who had business ties they preferred not to jeopardize. Several of these individuals now supported him, arguing that changing the rules afterward would destabilize the entire system, make future arrangements unreliable, and create disorder in a structure that depended on consistent expectations. The standoff hung on the edge of violence but eventually faded. The overseers lowered their rifles, though reluctantly. Tolbert issued threats that everyone knew he would not follow through on, claims of legal action, promises to expose these illegal fights, vows that Marshan would regret this decision. The other conspirators murmured in frustration but began walking toward the boats, waiting to take them back. The crowd slowly dispersed, filled with irritation, curiosity, and confusion. Many were already considering how this outcome might influence their own affairs and future dealings with Marshan and the others. Several glanced back at Samuel, still in the center of the ring, as if they needed one final look to confirm what they had witnessed. Within an hour, the clearing was nearly empty. The torches were put out. The ropes marking the ring were taken down. Enslaved workers moved quickly to remove evidence of the event, understanding that the less visible proof remained, the lower the chance of officials discovering anything that would cause problems for everyone involved. Marshan approached Samuel, who still stood silently where the ring had been. The swamp was already reclaiming the space, water seeping back in, mud covering the ground where people had stood. "We need to go," Marshan said quietly, "before they reconsider or bring reinforcements." Samuel nodded but did not leave right away. He looked toward the enslaved workers who had stepped forward to protect him, now preparing to return to their plantations under their owner's watch. His eyes moved across their faces, recognizing what they had risked, offering a wordless acknowledgement more meaningful than anything spoken. Despite Marshan's effort to stay composed, the words struck him deeply. 37 fights, 37 wins, 37 men dead because you and others like you chose to see us as property, not human beings. I hope the money you earned was worth it. Samuel did not deliver these words with anger or accusation. They were stated plainly, a simple acknowledgement of what had occurred and the cost of it. But their truth carried a weight Marshan could not ignore. Something within him, some final justification he had relied on, collapsed. The mindset that had allowed him to sleep at night no longer held. They walked out of the clearing together, yet their relationship had changed in a way that could not be undone. For 3 years, their roles had been transactional. Samuel fought in exchange for limited protection and small privileges. But now that arrangement felt empty. Samuel had kept every part of his bargain. He had fought on command. He had won 37 times. He had taken 37 lives. The balance between them was now beyond anything money or obligation could measure. The journey back through the swamp was silent. Marshan arranged for Samuel to stay in a small cabin on the edge of the plantation, away from the main house and other enslaved people. A trusted doctor was brought in, one who would treat Samuel without asking unnecessary questions. The medical evaluation was grim. 3 broken ribs, a fractured hand, severe bruising across most of his body, a concussion that would require several weeks of careful rest. But Samuel would survive, just as he always had, despite every attempt to break him. That night, Marshan sat in his study with his leather journal open. For more than 3 years he had recorded every detail. The name of each opponent, the length of each fight, the outcome, Samuel's diet, his training, his physical condition, the profits and expenses. 37 entries, each written with precision, like a business ledger documenting routine transactions. Now he read through those pages, trying to understand what he had created. When had this stopped being about income? When had Samuel ceased being property and become something more complex? When had the fights turned from entertainment into something that felt like ongoing moral failure? He found no clear answers. Instead, he wrote one final entry. The 37th fight is finished. Samuel remains undefeated. I pray that I never witness another contest like this, though I know the weight of what I have done will remain with me for the rest of my life. He closed the journal and locked it in his desk drawer, where it would remain undisturbed for 28 years. The consequences of that final fight spread far beyond the swamp. News traveled quickly, not only of Samuel's last victory but also of the events afterward. Enslaved workers stepping between rifles and a man they sought to protect. Planters arguing among themselves. A system showing fractures that hinted at deeper instability. Stories moved from plantation to plantation, carried by enslaved people, whispered by overseers in taverns, written in letters sent to business partners in other regions. Within 2 weeks, variations of the Akafalea story had spread through Louisiana and into Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas. The immediate results were complex. Several planters who had joined the conspiracy faced uncomfortable questioning from local authorities already monitoring reports of illegal fights. None were charged, Louisiana's power structure shielded them. But the scrutiny damaged their business relationships and reputations. Tolbert faced financial pressure when creditors, concerned by the rumors, demanded early repayment. Crane, who had lost his fighter and his investment, attempted to sue Marshan, claiming fraud or breach of contract. Anything that might recover his losses. The case collapsed immediately. The entire operation was illegal, so no court would recognize any part of it. Crane had to absorb the financial hit, and his standing suffered as well. Among planters, he was not criticized for participating in the fights, but for attempting to drag illegal dealings into legal courts. But the most significant effects were felt among enslaved communities beyond official records. The story of Samuel's 37 victories became more than entertainment. It became a symbol of possibility. Samuel had been placed in a situation meant to destroy him, yet he survived. He maintained his humanity, his relationships, and his ability to think strategically under extreme oppression. As the story spread, details were expanded and reshaped. Some claimed he had helped free dozens of people. Others said he had killed far more than 37 opponents. Some insisted he possessed a quality, not supernatural but unusual, that allowed him to endure what others could not. These additions did not weaken the story. They strengthened it, turning Samuel from a single person into a symbol with meaning far beyond his individual life. Marshan fulfilled his promises with unexpected thoroughness. Within 2 weeks, Dina received her freedom papers and $150, enough to start a life in New Orleans with real prospects. She left on March 31st with a merchant family who owed Marshan favors and could ensure her safety. Marshan never saw her again, though he received 2 letters over the years confirming that she had built a stable life as a seamstress, married, and begun a family. Her gratitude was expressed in the letters, but it felt incomplete, considering what she had endured. Silas received his documents on April 7th, along with $100 and a letter of introduction to a free black community in Mobile. At nearly 50 years old, adjusting to freedom after decades of enslavement was challenging in ways records could not capture. Still, he adapted, found work as a carpenter, and lived quietly until his death in 1867. His grandchildren would later tell stories about their ancestor who had known Samuel, who had witnessed something extraordinary, even if the exact details had faded. Marcus, the young boy who had followed Samuel around the stables when he was about 10, presented more difficult considerations. He was still very young, and freedom without family or support could put him at risk. Marshan arranged for Marcus to apprentice under a free black carpenter in Opelousas, a man named Tobido, who could offer both training and protection. The arrangement cost Marshan $200 plus ongoing financial support, which he paid without objection. Marcus learned the craft, eventually started his own successful business, and lived until 1903. He named his first son Samuel. Samuel himself remained on Marshan's plantation, but their relationship had changed in an unprecedented way for the slaveholding South. Marshan prepared freedom papers and presented them to Samuel barely 2 weeks after the final fight. Their conversation was brief but significant. "I'm giving you your freedom," Marshan said, holding out the papers. "You've earned it 1,000 times over. Go where you want. Do what you want. You'll never have to fight again." Samuel looked at the documents but did not take them. "What about the others?" he asked. "Others?" Marshan replied. "Everyone else. Still enslaved here. Still enslaved across this parish. Still trapped in the system that forced me to kill 37 men for your gain." Marshan had no answer. He held the papers, realizing their inadequacy beyond words. Samuel spoke again. "I'll stay. Not as your property, we both know that's over. But I'll stay because there's work that can't be done from New Orleans, Mobile, or anywhere else. Free black people are trying to survive in a world that doesn't want them to exist." "What work?" Marshan asked. Samuel's answer was indirect, but the meaning was clear. The work required patience, planning, and knowledge of the system's inner workings. Knowledge he had gained by observing wealthy men, listening to their business, relationships, and vulnerabilities. It was work that could not be rushed or done alone. Marshan realized then, or thought he did, that Samuel had spent 3 years understanding the plantation economy, learning who controlled credit, shipping, and political influence, and identifying weaknesses in a system that seemed absolute. He had been gathering intelligence, making connections, and preparing for something beyond his own freedom. "That's dangerous," Marshan said. "I'm not organizing resistance," Samuel replied. "I'm staying here, doing whatever work you assign me. If others gain freedom through channels that can't be traced to me, that's coincidence." He spoke with casual simplicity, as if discussing the weather, yet the implication was unmistakable. Samuel planned to use his position, reputation, and knowledge to systematically challenge the system, not through open rebellion, which would be crushed, but through careful, nearly undetectable actions. Marshan should have forced him to take the papers and leave, removing potential danger and notifying authorities. Instead, he nodded slowly and asked, "What do you need from me?" "Nothing. Just continue treating me as you have, as if I have a special status. It provides cover, makes it easier to move, talk, and arrange things. Don't ask questions about what you don't want to know." Thus began a period lasting nearly 3 years, during which Marshan's plantation became known for an unusually high number of enslaved workers gaining freedom through various means. Sometimes through legal manumission, sometimes through purchase by intermediaries who granted freedom. Sometimes they simply disappeared, traveling north along networks that always seemed to have resources and information. Local authorities investigated multiple times, questioning Marshan, searching records, and interviewing overseers. They found nothing illegal. Manumission was rare but legal. If some workers escaped with unusually good knowledge of routes and contacts, it could be coincidence. But Marshan knew better. He watched Samuel navigate the plantation, noting quiet conversations in stables, fields, and processing sheds. He saw information flow through channels outside official control, a systematic effort based on 3 years of understanding the system and its vulnerabilities. The fights themselves ended completely. Marshan made it clear to other planters that Samuel would never fight again and that the enterprise was finished. Most accepted this, recognizing that continuing would cause more problems than profit. A few tried to start their own operations, but none achieved the organization or drew crowds like before. The moment had passed. Marshan destroyed or claimed to destroy his journal. In reality, he removed pages that could implicate other planters in illegal activities and burned them. The remaining pages were locked in his desk, a record of something he could not fully articulate. Years later, his grandson would find the journal and donate it to a historical society, noting it documented activities Marshan regretted but believed should be remembered. The broader historical record remained incomplete. Newspaper accounts mentioned disturbances and illegal gatherings only vaguely. Government records contained no reference to Samuel beyond property listings that appeared and disappeared over several years. The 37 men who died in the fighting rings were often recorded as dying from fever, accident, or heart failure, masking the true circumstances. This was not unusual. The system of slavery relied on controlling both bodies and information, maintaining official narratives that erased anything threatening the notion that enslaved people were property. Events like the fighting rings existed in the shadows, acknowledged by participants but never documented in ways that could trigger legal or political consequences. Samuel himself disappeared from historical records sometime in early 1854. No death certificate exists. No sale was recorded. No documentation places him in Louisiana or anywhere else afterward. The most reliable accounts, pieced together from letters and oral histories collected decades later, suggest he simply left one morning, walking away from Martian's plantation with the same calm certainty he had brought to everything else. Some stories claimed he went north, joining the networks that would later become the Underground Railroad. Others suggested he remained in the South, continuing the work he had begun, helping others find paths to freedom. Still others said he disappeared into the Atchafalaya Basin, becoming one of the Maroons living in the swamp beyond the reach of plantation authority. The truth, whatever it was, remained elusive. Marshan lived until 1879, dying at age 70. His obituary in the Opelousas newspaper made no mention of the fights, no reference to Samuel, nothing to indicate the extraordinary events that had shaped his middle years. By all accounts, he had become a relatively unremarkable retired planter, remembered mainly for his business acumen and his unexpected support for certain Reconstruction policies that granted limited rights to formerly enslaved people. Among his effects after death was a letter dated April 15, 1865, the day after Lincoln's assassination. Its 2 paragraphs, written in handwriting that alternated between careful control and barely contained emotion, read, "I have lived with the knowledge of what I did for 24 years. I forced a man to kill 37 others for my profit and entertainment. I told myself I was protecting him, giving him privileges, fulfilling a bargain. The truth is simpler. I was using him, exploiting the one thing he had left, his strength and his will to protect others. The fact that he survived, transcended what I tried to make him into, is no credit to me. It is a testament to something in him I never understood. If there is a just God, I will be held accountable for those 37 deaths and every other sin committed for profit. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I can only hope that the small actions I took later, granting freedom, providing money, supporting Reconstruction, might count for something. But I doubt they will. Some debts cannot be paid." The letter was unsigned, but the handwriting matched Martian's earlier journal entries. His family debated destroying it but ultimately preserved it with his other papers. It eventually reached an archive at Louisiana State University, where it remains available to researchers. Whether Samuel's story was fully factual or embellished continued to be debated among historians encountering fragments of documentation. Fight records were sparse and often contradictory. Official documents referenced these events only vaguely, and newspaper accounts were either silent or ambiguous. Yet among descendants of enslaved workers from St. Landry Parish and surrounding areas, the story remained remarkably consistent in its essential details. There was a man called Samuel, sometimes called the Bayou Giant, who fought 37 times and never lost. He killed 37 men not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. He used those fights to learn the system that enslaved him and eventually find ways to undermine it from within. He understood that true freedom was not about winning fights, but about changing the conditions that made those fights necessary. The details shifted with each retelling, the exact dates, names, and locations, but the core truth persisted, passed down through generations as a story of resistance, survival, and the indestructible human spirit. In 1932, a researcher named Elizabeth Hartwell, working for the Federal Writers Project, interviewed a 93-year-old woman in New Orleans named Sarah Desmond. Sarah's grandmother had been enslaved on a plantation near Opelousas during the 1840s and 1850s. The interview, preserved in the Library of Congress archives, recorded her words, "My grandmother told me about a man who fought for white men's entertainment but never let them break his spirit. She said he was the strongest person she ever knew, not because of his body, but because of his mind. He understood things about the world that others took years to learn. When the war came and freedom arrived, dozens of people credited him with helping them survive until that day. His real victory wasn't the fights he won, but the people he saved." When asked if Sarah's grandmother had known Samuel personally, she replied ambiguously. She knew him well enough to understand what he represented. That was all anyone needed to know. The clearing on the edge of the Atchafalaya Basin, site of the final fight, was reclaimed by the swamp within years. Water rose, vegetation took over, and within a decade, no trace remained. The swamp erased evidence, not through force, but through patient, inevitable reclamation. Yet the memory endured. Local people, particularly descendants of enslaved families, would sometimes point to the area and recount the stories. The details varied, but the central themes remained. Violence imposed on people who found ways to survive it. Resistance in forms the oppressors never anticipated, and human dignity preserved even under conditions designed to destroy it. Whether Samuel himself lived to see the end of slavery, whether he died free or remained enslaved, or whether he existed exactly as described or as a composite of multiple people's experiences, these questions remain unresolved. The historical record was deliberately incomplete, shaped by those with every incentive to erase such stories from official memory. Yet the story survived, preserved in oral traditions, in fragmentary documents, and in the collective memory of communities that recognized its importance. It endured because it represented something essential about the era, about the system of slavery, and about human resistance to oppression. Even if every detail is not literally true, the core truth it conveys is undeniable. By the 20th century, Samuel had become a legendary figure across Black communities in Louisiana and beyond. The specifics of his story blended with other tales of resistance and survival, but his name remained widely known. Parents invoked it when teaching children about strength and perseverance. Community leaders referenced it when discussing the long history of opposition to oppression. Scholars studied the fragmentary records, attempting to separate fact from embellishment, never entirely succeeding, but recognizing that the effort itself was meaningful. In 1968, during the height of the civil rights movement, a young activist named Marcus Johnson, named after the boy who had followed Samuel in the stables more than a century earlier, wrote an essay about the legend for a Black history publication. His conclusion captured the essence. We may never know every detail of Samuel's life or whether all stories about him are strictly factual. But one thing is certain. In one of the darkest periods in American history, enslaved people found ways to resist, maintain their humanity, protect each other, and survive long enough to see freedom arrive. Samuel's story, whether literal history or symbolic truth, represents countless acts of resistance and survival. That alone makes it true in the ways that matter most. The story continues to be told, to evolve, and to hold different meanings for different people. Some see it as a tale of individual strength. Others see it as evidence of collective, systematic resistance. Still others see it as a stark reminder of the violence inherent in slavery and the impossible choices forced upon the enslaved. All of these interpretations carry truth. Samuel fought 37 times because he had no choice. He killed 37 men because the system demanded it. He survived because something within him refused to be broken despite every attempt to destroy him. He used that survival to help others find paths to freedom, turning his forced violence into a form of resistance the architects of the system never anticipated. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything has been revealed? Or do you sense there are still secrets buried in the swamps of Louisiana waiting to be discovered? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale of resistance and survival from one of America's darkest periods, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who values the hidden stories of our past. The truth is always more complex than we imagine, and the past holds more secrets than we can ever fully uncover. Despite his efforts to control the situation, Marshan could not ignore the consequences of Samuel's victories. 37 fights, 37 victories, 37 men dead, because men like him had decided that Samuel and others were property rather than people. Marshan felt the weight of that truth as Samuel spoke it plainly, without anger, simply stating the reality of what had happened and what it had cost. For the first time, Marshan sensed something break inside him. A final defense he had used to justify his actions, the mental framework that allowed him to sleep at night. They left the clearing together, but their relationship had fundamentally changed. The transactional nature of their interaction for 3 years, fights in exchange for protection, violence in exchange for privileges, had been fulfilled and found wanting. Samuel had held up his end. He had fought when told to fight, won 37 times, and killed 37 men. The debt between them went beyond money or obligation. The journey back through the swamp was silent. Marshan arranged for Samuel to be taken to a cabin at the edge of his plantation, away from the main house and other enslaved workers. A trusted doctor was brought in to treat Samuel's injuries discreetly. The assessment was severe: 3 broken ribs, a fractured hand, widespread contusions, and a concussion requiring weeks of careful care. Yet Samuel would survive, as he always had, despite every attempt to destroy him. That night, Marshan sat in his study with his leather-bound journal open. For 3 years and 2 months, he had meticulously documented every fight, every victory, every transaction. 37 entries tracked opponents, fight duration, outcomes, Samuel's diet, training, physical condition, profits, and expenses. Now, reviewing the pages, he realized the enterprise had become something more than business. When had Samuel stopped being property and become something Marshan could not name? When had the fights become ongoing horror rather than entertainment? No answer satisfied him. Instead, he wrote one final entry: "The 37th fight has concluded. Samuel remains undefeated. I pray to God I never see another such contest, though the guilt of what I have orchestrated will follow me until my dying day." He closed the journal and locked it in his desk, where it would remain for 28 years. The ripple effects of the final fight extended far beyond the clearing. Enslaved workers defied armed overseers. Planters turned against each other. The system itself showed cracks, and word of Samuel's victories spread through plantations, taverns, letters, and communities throughout Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas. Immediate consequences varied. Some planters faced questions from authorities investigating illegal fighting, though none were charged. Tolbert faced financial difficulties as creditors demanded repayment after hearing of his involvement. Crane, who lost both his fighter and investment, tried legal action against Marshan but failed. Other planters saw him as a man who violated unwritten rules, not by illegal fights, but by seeking remedy for illegal acts. The most lasting impact, however, was among enslaved communities. Samuel's 37 victories became proof of possibility, evidence that survival, strategic thought, and humanity could endure under oppression. Stories evolved over time. Some claimed Samuel freed dozens of people directly. Others said he had extraordinary abilities beyond ordinary men. These embellishments enhanced his symbolic power. Marshan honored promises to others affected by the fights. Dina received freedom papers and $150 within 2 weeks, securing her life in New Orleans. Silas gained his papers, $100, and a letter of introduction to a free black community in Mobile, adapting to freedom and living until 1867. Marcus, the young boy who had followed Samuel, was apprenticed to a free black carpenter in Opelousas, learning a trade, eventually building his own business, and living until 1903. Samuel himself remained on Marshan's plantation, but the relationship had changed. Marshan offered him freedom papers, but Samuel declined, asking instead to remain to continue work that could not be done elsewhere, work to help others navigate a system hostile to their existence. Samuel's explanations were cautious but clear. He intended to use his knowledge, reputation, and position to carefully undermine the system from within, not through open rebellion, but by patient, nearly invisible action. Marshan should have refused, should have forced Samuel to take his freedom and leave, should have alerted other planters or authorities. Instead, he found himself nodding and asking, "What do you need from me?" "Nothing," Samuel replied. "Just continue treating me as if I have a special status. It provides cover, allows movement, communication, and organizing, without asking questions you don't want answered." Over the next 3 years, Marshan's plantation became known for unusually high numbers of enslaved workers gaining freedom through legal manumission, intermediaries, or safe escapes. Authorities investigated but found nothing actionable. Samuel moved quietly, using the knowledge he had accumulated about the system and its vulnerabilities. The fights ended permanently, and attempts to replicate them elsewhere failed. Marshan destroyed, or claimed to destroy, parts of his journal that could implicate others but kept the rest locked away. After his death, his grandson donated the remaining pages to a historical society, preserving the record for future researchers. The historical record remained deliberately incomplete. Newspaper accounts and government records were vague, and the deaths of the 37 men were obscured, listed as from fever, accident, or heart failure. No death certificate for Samuel exists. No record places him in Louisiana or elsewhere after the events. Oral histories and letters collected decades later suggest he simply left one morning, walking away from the plantation with calm certainty. Some say he joined networks that became the Underground Railroad. Others claim he stayed in the South, continuing his work. Some even suggest he became a maroon in the Atchafalaya Basin. The truth remains elusive. Marshan died in 1879 at age 70. His obituary omitting any mention of the fights or Samuel. Among his papers was a letter dated April 15, 1865, reflecting on the 37 deaths he had caused for profit and entertainment. He acknowledged his exploitation, admitted he did not deserve forgiveness, and expressed doubt that any later acts of support or manumission could ever atone for his sins. Samuel's story persisted through generations, blending fact and legend. By the 20th century, he was a figure of legend in Black communities across Louisiana. Parents and community leaders invoked his name to teach resilience and strategic resistance. Scholars studied fragmentary records, trying to separate fact from embellishment, understanding that the attempt itself mattered. In 1968, activist Marcus Johnson, named after the boy who had followed Samuel, wrote about him, noting that Samuel represented countless acts of resistance and survival during one of America's darkest periods. The story continues to be told, evolving over time. Some see it as a tale of personal strength, others as systematic resistance, and still others as a stark reminder of slavery's violence and impossible choices. All interpretations hold truth. Samuel fought because he had no choice. He killed because the system demanded it. He survived because his spirit refused to be broken and used that survival to help others, turning forced violence into resistance the oppressors never anticipated. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything has been revealed? Or are there still secrets buried in the Louisiana swamps waiting to be discovered? Leave your comment below. If you appreciated this tale of resistance and survival from one of America's darkest periods, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who values the hidden stories of our past. The truth is always more complex than it appears, and the past holds more secrets than we can ever fully uncover.